Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me on this Thursday. This is the day in which the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives. Preliminary vote that's already pretty perfunctory to actually elect Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House once again. 8 years ago, she handed the gavel off, but now, of course, has a chance to get it back put into her hands, and actually invited quite a number of individuals to participate. The singer Tony Bennett is in the gallery. The Grateful Dead drummer Mickey Hart, television personality Tim Gunn are just a few of those. Also, the mayor of the District of Columbia, Muriel Browser, as well as some people from Emily's List and the presidents of Georgetown University, as well as Trinity Washington University, to mention just a few. Now, of course, you wonder what the first item of business is. Well, first of all, you elect the Speaker of the House, then you swear in the new members, of which there are quite a few, about 100 that are Democrats that will be sworn in, along with a number of Republicans that will be sworn in as new members. And then one of the questions was asked is, well, would you hold hearings on Medicare for all? And the answer is yes. So that may be one of the first orders of business. We'll be following that for some time. Of course, we've talked about it. A little bit later, I'll get into what that might mean for us. And tomorrow, I might just mention that we will get into that in some detail, because Dr. Merrill Matthews will be with us for our Friday weekend edition. And I may wait till we do the national broadcast in the next hour when we talk about that with him tomorrow, because we even had on Monday some people calling in saying, okay, well, have seen the Republicans haven't done a real good job of explaining what they're for. Okay, we all understood what they, quote, were against, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. What are you for, especially now that at least one judge has declared that unconstitutional, although put a stay on that ruling. So that will be something we're going to get into with some detail, because Dr. Merrill Matthews has a very good piece that appeared at IPI.org, Institute for Policy Innovation, on what health care insurance should be, which is a good contrast to what it is right now. So we'll talk about some of that tomorrow, but I thought I'd just mention that. And this article here says that Nancy Pelosi knew this moment would come, even if others had their doubts or worked to stop her. Nancy Pelosi, of course, is poised to be elected and will be elected as the next Speaker of the House, the only woman, by the way, that's ever held that office, and now one of few elected officials who will be returning to it. Last time a speaker regained the gavel was more than a half century ago. So this is something that when she hands it off to first John Boehner and now gets it back from Paul Ryan, it's a pretty significant event. The California Democrat has spent her political career being underestimated, only to prove the naysayers wrong. In this case, it was winning back the Democratic majority and amassing the votes for the speaker's job. Nancy Pelosi told the Associated Press, "None of us is indispensable, but I do know that I'm very good at what I do." Nobody can accuse anybody in political life of being shy and retiring. In accepting the gavel, Pelosi will give a nod to the new era divided government with a pledge to reach across the aisle. We, of course, know better than that. In the chamber, and, of course, a number of other things here as well. She said the floor of the House must be America's town hall, where people will see our debates and where our voices will be heard and affect our decisions. In previewing Democratic priorities, she talks about lowering health care costs, investing in green infrastructure, which a little bit later we have some time, we're going to get into the whole issue of the Green New Deal and what that means. And, of course, we've already talked about Medicare for All. So those are going to be just a couple of the priorities in the distance. But just before we take a break, let me talk about what is the near-term priority, and that is to try to reopen the government. So this particular article that was in the Washington Post is an attempt to kind of summarize what they believe are going to be her first agenda items over the next couple of days. And that is where Eric Warner and Sung Byung Kim said that Democrats will take control of the House on Thursday with a stark challenge to President Trump, voting on legislation that could fund the federal government while denying Trump the money he has demanded to build a wall across the U.S.-Mexico border. Republican leaders in the Senate said that they would support only a proposal that has the president's backing, and without additional wall money, the Democrats' offer is unlikely, to break the stalemate that has shuttered large parts of the federal government since December 22nd. But the strategy Democrats announced Monday would usher in a new era of divided government with a dare to Trump aimed at forcing him and Senate Republicans to take their deal or prolong a partial government shutdown. And so it goes into some of the details here. Nancy Pelosi saying the president is using the government shutdown to try to force an expensive and ineffective wall upon the American people. But Democrats have offered two bills which separate the arguments over the wall from the government shutdown. Republican leaders would have the option to pass the bipartisan bills, reopening much of the government while the border fight continue, but doing so would only diminish Trump's leverage as he demands billions in taxpayer funding for the wall. And again, this is a piece in the in the Washington Post, which of course is much more critical of the Trump proposal, and of course also illustrates that as well. Reading into this, it was kind of intriguing to say that there are some other parts of the government that they want to reopen, and I was unaware that there were a few places where the government has been essentially shut down. So it's more than just the December 22nd shutdown. And of course, there's another one looming very quickly, because even though we have funding for essentially 3/4 of the government, that is only a continuing resolution, which in a couple of weeks, most months, is going to run out as well. So this ongoing battle surface in large part because we can't get what is called regular order in the House of Representatives. There has been a real desire on the part of the so-called Freedom Caucus and others to have regular order so that each one of the 12 cabinet budgets passes through both the House and the Senate in a sequential manner and then is signed by the president. But it has been rare in which that has taken place. And once again, we find ourselves with these continuing resolutions that are simply an attempt to have a stopgap measure to get us a little bit further. But nevertheless, what we have now is, I guess, what most people are calling, would that be, they said a 16-day standoff, although I think it's further than that now, but we'll add 17, 18 now by the time we get to where today is. But again, about 800,000 federal workers have been affected, with an estimated 350,000 furloughed at home, with others still working because their jobs are demanded and deemed essential, which I think is kind of interesting. You have 800,000 workers affected, but 350,000 of those 800,000 are considered non-essential. So essentially, they're sitting at home, knowing full well that they will get their paycheck eventually retroactively. And so it gets back to a question that was asked yesterday, if you happen to be listening to the time. Will we save money with the shutdown? The answer is no. It will cost us, because a lot of work that should be being done right now is not being done, but we'll still be paying those individuals that didn't do the work. Great job if you can get it, don't you think? Anyway, I just wanted to give you a brief update on what is happening in the House of Representatives. For those of you in the state of Texas, I might just mention next Tuesday is when both the Texas House and the Texas Senate convene. We'll see if we can get maybe somebody calling in that day and tell us what's going on in the Capitol. But I just thought you'd get a little bit of an update before we get into some of these important issues in the news. When we come back, we'll spend some time talking about those. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Much has been written about the millennial generation, but the most readable and interesting is the book by Grant Skeldon, The Passion Generation. He has been a regular participant on the Point of View radio talk show Millennial Roundtable and brings lots of insight into this generation. He is the founder of the Initiative Network that seeks to train millennials to be Christ-loving, city-changing, church-investing, disciple-making local missionaries. Although the book focuses on millennials, it's really about discipleship. His argument is the critical component missing is discipleship. He explains we don't have a millennial problem. Instead, we have a discipleship problem. Our culture is feeling the result of a mentorless, fatherless generation. As you open the book, you will discover that it is very different from most other books. There are lots of diagrams and pictures that drive home his key points. When Grant Skeldon was on my radio program, he explained that idea came to him when an artist on a whiteboard started drawing and diagramming his message while he was giving it. He thought it would be a good idea to include such visual aids inside the book. You will also notice a device icon while reading through the book. This is a key that instructs you to pull up videos on a website that illustrate and supplement the material in that section of the book. And even the acknowledgments section is different because it features line drawings of the people who were influential in Grant's life. You can read the book as an individual, but I think its greatest power can be found in studying it with others. Discipleship is more than merely the transfer of information. It involves life change that takes place when we're intimately involved in each other's life. The book can be a catalyst for discipleship. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we also broadcast on Facebook Live. Love to get your comments there, and I do appreciate so many of you yesterday that followed up with my suggestion of taking my commentary yesterday about the 7 threats that churches might face in 2019 and send them off. I noticed quite a number of you sent them, I assume, to pastors or elders or deacons or others, and I would encourage you to do that. My commentary today is about the Passion Generation. Again, I give you that assignment to go and pass that on to individuals who really want to understand the millennial generation. This book by Grant Skeldon, who was, of course, on the program with us and oftentimes joins us for the Wednesday roundtable. I think he's going to be on next Wednesday, as a matter of fact. This is just an excellent book, which I give high marks to, and again, some resources that you can pass on to others. Well, we spent a little bit of time talking about the House of Representatives, and in the next hour, get back to some of that and also talk about a couple of other interesting things taking place there, not the least of which is another Muslim has decided to use Thomas Jefferson's centuries-old copy of the Quran. Instead of holding her hand on the Bible, she wants to hold her hand on the Quran, and of course, I'll explain why Thomas Jefferson had a copy of the Quran. He wanted to understand the Barbary pirates at the time, but nevertheless, that is something that Keith Ellison has done. This new member of Congress has done that as well. So we'll get into some of that in the next hour. But first, let me talk about Mitt Romney's editorial that's generating some response, and also give you a program note. In just about a half an hour, we're going to be talking with Gaston Mooney. He's the president of Blaze Media. This has been very interesting, and one of the articles we've posted here is really about, if you will, kind of a media merger of a number of different conservative groups that are all now reaching a very large audience. So I wanted to talk about kind of the role of conservative media. So we'll chat with him for a little bit of time. And then in the next hour, that would be at the 2 o'clock hour, Abby Johnson will be with us. Of course, she is well known as an individual who had a career with Planned Parenthood, began to be concerned about what was taking place, became not only pro-life, but a pro-life activist. And my commentary tomorrow, by the way, which relates very much to even some of the conversation we'll have today, is about the new movie coming out called Unplanned. Now, of course, Abby Johnson's book was called Unplanned, but the movie is one which in which Ashley Bratcher plays Abby Johnson in the movie. And it's just a very powerful testimony, which I've shared here before. And we'll get into more of that a little bit later, because this actress knew that her mother had had an abortion before her mother had given birth to her. What she didn't know until after she was sharing with her mother the fact that she was in this movie on abortion was that her mother was going to abort her too. And so it's a powerful story. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. But one of the things I wanted to maybe talk about was an issue that we raised yesterday, and that is this op-ed that came from Mitt Romney. Now, again, Mitt Romney is the incoming senator from Utah, individual that, of course, ran for the presidency, was ahead of Bain Capital, was the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, individual that was responsible in large part for turning around the Salt Lake City Olympics and a number of other things. But interestingly enough, he actually has written a piece that, on the one hand, is pretty critical of the character and even some of the policy choices of the president, but also complimentary of other policy inactions. And so it's kind of interesting. But nevertheless, what I thought was so intriguing is that Ben Shapiro decided to explain that what this has done, it's sort of opened up kind of a choice that really nobody really needs to make right now, and that is Mitt Romney has said he doesn't plan to run for the presidency, although this sure sounded like the opening salvo of somebody who might run again for the presidency. But nevertheless, I'll jump over one of the paragraphs to come to Ben Shapiro's second paragraph, in which he says, the essay in truth reads like the opener of a presidential campaign. I would agree. It's a stock speech replete with broad recommendations on policy. For example, more strength in foreign policy, a call to repair our fiscal foundation. It's full of optimism. I remain optimistic about our future and things of that nature. Romney states that Americans will eschew the politics of anger and fear if they're summoned to the responsibility by leaders in homes and churches and schools and businesses and government. And so you would think he's sort of setting himself up as a possible leader. Now, he may not be the political leader, but he might be the moral leader. And Ben Sass has sometimes taken on that role as well. But it is interesting because by the time you get to the next paragraph, Ben Shapiro asked the question I was asking yesterday in my mind. If he's not going to be the leader, then the entire op-ed raises the question, what do you want us to do about it, Senator? By declaring Trump unfit for his office, Romney immediately forces a choice. Should we back Trump in 2020 or challenge him? Should Republicans be pushed to choose between an incumbent president and a person of more character and consistent conservative conviction? And would a primary effort actually effectuate that choice? And this is where I think Ben Shapiro, again, maybe more mature than his age might indicate, really, I think, does a very good analysis of what this may or may not mean. He says the answer to the second question is previous, obviously no. Barring impeachable activity on Trump's part, here's how an actual primary campaign against Trump from Romney or anyone else would play out. The primarying candidate would declare himself or herself superior to character to Trump, which would probably be true, he says. A better representative of conservatism than Trump, which could be true in theory, but probably won't be true in policy terms. Trump ended up being a lot more conservative, at least on some of the actions he's taken, than any of us around this table would have guessed. and a more likely 2020 victor, which would likely be false. On the first count, Republican voters would look the other way, just as they did in 2016, having learned the lesson that character doesn't matter, ironically enough, from 2012 Mitt Romney, whose sterling character plus $5 bought him a cup of coffee at that election cycle. On the second count, Republican voters would have to decide whether to throw out a sitting president responsible for, among other things, now here's a long list, the seating of 2 Supreme Court justices and another 83 Article 3 judges, in other words, very conservative judges, a massive tax cut, a systematic dismantling of regulations, including the repeal of the individual mandate under Obamacare and the destruction of the Obama administration's Title IX standards, the formation of an anti-Iranian alliance among Israel, Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, the moving of the U.S. Embassy to Israel, in Israel to Jerusalem, the rebuilding of the American military, criminal justice reform, a policy libertarians certainly favor, and a booming economy thus far. Trump has governed far more conservatively than expected. And then he says on the final count, Republican voters would be asked to believe that Trump is unelectable. Of course, that's the same argument some of us made in 2016. By the way, Ben Shapiro was not a always Trumper by any stretch of the imagination, when he then proceeded to beat Hillary Clinton. It's highly unlikely primary voters will find that contention convincing in light of 2016, no matter what the polls say, and they'd be particularly unlikely to think that someone like Romney, a 2-time presidential loser, once in the primaries, once in the general, widely considered to have run a milquetoast campaign, would perform better than Trump. So whether Mitt Romney is running for the presidency or not, I think that kind of ends that one pretty quickly. So when we come back, I would like to also read something real quickly from Jim Garrity, because he also talks about, in a different sort of way, why it is unlikely that Donald Trump will be opposed in the primary for a different set of reasons, although he would agree, I think, with most of what we've just said a moment ago. Well, let's, if we can, take a break. And when we do so, let me encourage you to do a couple of things. First of all, as I mentioned, my Viewpoints commentary today is about this very excellent book by our good friend Grant Skeldon, who will be on next Wednesday for our Millennial Roundtable. And so I think if you know somebody that maybe is interested in the millennial generation or a fellow millennial, I would encourage you to go to the website and click on the Viewpoints section and then hit the share button and send it on to somebody. Number 2, of course, we also encourage you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. If you find yourself saying, I really appreciate some of the facts and figures, the various guests and interviews that you do, and you've maybe never supported this ministry as we start 2019, maybe click on that button that says donate. Even a small gift is just your way of saying, hey, I believe in what you're doing. Don't have a lot to share, but, here's $5, here's $10. But some of you might even say, I understand you have monthly needs, and I have monthly income. So maybe you could join with us in our Truth Team for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. You'll certainly be able to support this ministry. You'll also be receiving our Outlook magazine and all sorts of other great resources we like to put in your hands. So you can do that by going to the website, pointofview.net. Come back, we'll talk just a little bit more about this presidential campaign. You might think it's really early. The Democrats have already set one of the debates for June of this year. Hard to believe. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team. or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. About half an hour, like I mentioned, we're going to have Gaston Mooney on. He is the president of Blaze Media, and this has been an interesting kind of merger between CRTV, that's Mark Levin, and the Blaze, and all the things that are happening there. And so it's kind of intriguing to see how this is an attempt to try to pull together various conservative outlets, which are by their very core conservative. Even people that refer to Fox News as conservative, really it attempts to just try to be fair, but and it has a number of conservative commentators, but this one would be overtly conservative and pulling together a variety of different groups in that regard. So we're going to talk about what that means in terms of broadcasting, and so we'll talk about that with him. And as I mentioned, at 2 o'clock today, we'll have Abby Johnson on. We'll be kind of giving you a little bit of a preview for the movie Unplanned, which, by the way, really won't come out till March, so we got lots of time to really promote that. But also be talking about the story of Ashley Bratcher, who was the actress who portrayed Abby Johnson in the movie, which is coming out, and has her own incredible story. So a couple stories to talk about, and we'll talk about what that might mean then. And I want to get into one of the articles we've posted here about California. Even though right now we're not broadcasting in California, I think we can learn some very important lessons for how the Golden State, which at one time was almost at the top of almost every particular fact and figure statistic, in terms of education, in terms of balanced budgets, in terms of the attractiveness of the so-called Golden State, to now, as Victor Davis Hanson refers to it, wealth, poverty, and flight, the same old state of California, in which he talks about coastal elites, impoverished immigrants, and a fleeing middle class. So we'll get into some of that in just a minute. But I thought I'd just continue for a few more minutes this whole conversation about the impact of the editorial by Mitt Romney. And in this particular case, Jim Garrity, writing for National Review, says if you're a Republican official with presidential ambitions, why would you run a primary challenge against Donald Trump in 2020? I've always wondered if that might happen, and John Kasich may actually do so, but it doesn't look like Mitt Romney at the moment is planning to do so, and he's already denied that he has any interest in running for president again. But Jim Garrity explains why it's probably unlikely that anybody will. He says President Trump's job approval, at least among Republicans, is 89%, which just is amazing to me. But nevertheless, it's been in the low 80s to been in the 80s to low 90s sometimes. And none of the missteps over the last couple of years, 2 years, have had any significant impact. And he gives you a long list. You know, there's some fine people on both sides after the Charlottesville incident, or the public embrace for a moment of time on gun control, referring to some of these countries with a word we can't use on the air. And of course, Stormy Daniels. Of course, the whole issue, which maybe isn't necessarily his fault, but was easily tagged to him about separating children from their parents at the border, as well as the criticism of his generals, his cabinet, just about anybody you can imagine. It goes through a long list of those. And yet, interestingly enough, says if none of that has budged the approval rating that at least Republicans give to Donald Trump, what makes you think that it's going to go any further? And if anything, there is an interesting poll that comes out from Quinnipiac University. It found that the vast majority of Republicans have enormous across-the-board confidence in just about everything that President Trump has been doing. 82% said he had good leadership skills. 77% said he was honest. Really? I do. Okay. 92% said he was intelligent. 80% agreed that he was someone who shares your values. And so, again, maybe that explains why there are so few people that indeed might run against him. Jim Garrity does talk about the possibility, and the one that has been mentioned most often is whether or not the former governor of Ohio, John Kasich, would run. But that would be tough because, as he points out, he left office by deciding to veto a bill that would restrict abortion, by actually renouncing his relationship with the National Rifle Association, as well as actually fighting against the attempts to repeal and replace Obamacare. You can make a list pretty quickly of things that would be deal breakers, I think, for your typical Republican in the primaries. So that would certainly be something. And then again, as Jim Garrity points out, even if Donald Trump gets a primary challenger from the left, the president will probably squash him in the contest, but he'll also have a convenient, if not terribly plausible, scapegoat for any 2020 defeat. And so you can see some of that being said as well. So anyway, it goes into a lot of detail about this particular issue, which I thought would be helpful to read, and then goes from there, interestingly enough, to talk about one of the biggest issues facing one of those people that might run against Donald Trump again, and that's Bernie Sanders. Because you have this report out of the New York Times where former staffers from the Bernie Sanders 2016 presidential campaign are publicly complaining about mistreatment as women, sexual harassment, pay disparity, and just an overall toxic environment in the Sanders campaign. Now, you can read through it, and it's pretty incredible, all the claims that are being made there. But I do, again, appreciate Jim Garrity for really kind of summarizing it and saying, once you've read through this entire New York Times article, you only have one of two options. He says option number one is Bernie Sanders and the top men around him really were oblivious to an atmosphere of harassment, that they ignored complaints from the female staffers, and I guess generally believed that their credentials as self-proclaimed feminist freed them from any obligation to ensure that the women on the campaign were being treated fairly and appropriately. That's option number one. Option number two, which is also quite likely, that the kind of women who are most likely to volunteer to work on a campaign for a campaign like Bernie Sanders are naturally more inclined to interpret interactions with men as harassments. And he goes on to say, having consumed endless accounts of men as sexual aggressors, agents of the patriarchy, and licentious abusers eager to use positions of power as leverage for sex, they will see many innocuous, even friendly interactions as a major scandal and injustice. So you've got one of those two options, maybe a little of both, but I thought it was kind of interesting as we are once again maybe prematurely looking at presidential campaigns. Already Elizabeth Warren has formed her exploratory committee. In just a few more days, a number of other Democrats will do so. And as I said, the first Democratic debate is now scheduled for June. Never have we had a debate that early, but I think the Democrat and the Democratic Party in particular is thinking if we have as many people running this time as ran in the Republican primary, we need to maybe cull out about half a dozen of these names real fast because it just gets really confusing. And so we'll see what happens, but we'll pay attention to that. And if indeed we're talking about a presidential primary debate in June, it will be setting a new record. Just before we take a break, though, let me also point out that one of the articles we've posted here is about the state of California, written by our good friend Victor Davis Hanson. Has been on the program with us many times before. He brings such a wealth of perspective because, first of all, classically trained, a university professor who nevertheless lives on the farm that his family has had for almost a century, I guess, now. So he lives in two worlds. He lives in the world in Central Valley, which is flooded with immigrants and has almost a toxic environment around him. And then he gets in his car and drives over to the Hoover Institute, which is where he actually is a fellow at Stanford University in Palo Alto. And so he really sees the two different Californias. And as a result, what we want to talk about when we come back real briefly is the fact that you have really just two different kinds of California. For example, in Palo Alto, California, which is where Stanford is located and where the Hoover Institute is, 40% of the people in that city have a master's degree or higher. Very well educated, of course, very affluent. Yet, he also points out that there are 7 million people in California that do not even possess a high school diploma. And so that's the size of kind of the 9 counties of California's Bay Area, roughly from Napa all the way to Silicon Valley, just to give you a sense. And so you have just a striking difference in terms of education, in terms of income, in terms of culture between these two Californias. And so when we come back, I want to talk about that briefly, because what has happened in California may be a preview of other things that could be happening in even our own home state. So we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. James Gillespie Blaine had an interesting life. He served as Speaker of the House of Congress and in the United States Senate. He twice served as Secretary of State, holding the position under 3 separate presidents. He even sought the presidency, losing to Grover Cleveland. But Blaine's most notorious legacy, however, is an amendment that bears his name. Blaine got his idea from a fiery speech delivered by President Grant at the height of a national controversy over the nation's public schools and whether religion had any place within them. In 1875, President Grant declared, "Leave the matter of religion to the family altar, the church, and the private school, supported entirely by private contributions. Keep the church and state forever separate." Days later, Blaine introduced a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution that would prevent any government aid to, quote, sectarian schools, especially Catholic schools. His amendment failed, but various states borrowed his proposal and their constitutions were amended instead. Today, almost 40 states have a constitutional provision that prevents government aid to religious institutions. These amendments have empowered states to legally discriminate against religious organizations when they perform the same work secular institutions do. That prejudice led Justice Thomas to write of Blaine amendments in the 1999 decision of Mitchell v. Helms, quote, "This doctrine, born of bigotry, should be buried now." To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, let me just mention, as we've said before, we're going to be talking about this merger of some of these conservative organizations and media outlets. Of course, I'm right now reading from a piece that we've posted on California's decline. A little bit later, we'll get into the one on Twitter is toxic, which I think is fascinating, by our good friend David French. And so we'll get into some of those topics. But if any of those you'd like to read in their entirety, of course, we have those available at our website, pointofview.net. California is kind of a study in contrast, and it's an illustration of what will happen if we allow more and more immigration. One of the things I'm going to get into in a lot more detail in the national audience hour is the whole cost of immigration. There have been some studies, one by the Center for Immigration Studies, that estimates that each illegal alien costs nearly $70,000 during their lifetime. I take all of these estimates with a grain of salt because the starting point on this is we can't even agree on how many people are here illegally. So if you can't even understand what the base number is, everything else is going to be somewhat fuzzy anyway. This particular one, though, says that they felt that some of the initial studies which were done were too low, and estimate that maybe the fiscal cost of illegal immigrants is more like $125,000 to $135,000. And again, the fact that you have a range from $70,000 to almost twice as much, again, shows you that you don't want to take too much of it seriously. But a lot of people say, well, yes, but a lot of these individuals are paying into Social Security and probably will never pull it out because if they're here illegally, they're probably using a Social Security number of a dead person. So I'll hold this chart up, which is how those numbers have been calculated, in which you look at the federal expenditures and the state expenditures to come up with the national expenditures. Then you go in and look at the tax contributions by illegal aliens, the total federal taxes paid, the state and local taxes paid, and subtract the two, and you still come up with just huge numbers. And so, again, however you want to look at it, you have to, of course, always, when you're dealing with statistics based upon things for which we don't have an accurate count, take them with a grain of salt. But it's just an illustration of the impact that immigration has had in a negative way in the state of California. And that's exactly the point that Victor Davis Hanson is making. You have a study in contrast. As I mentioned just a minute ago, 7 million Californians do not possess a high school diploma, and yet in Palo Alto, California, nearly half of the city has a master's degree or higher. Or look at it another way. California has 4 universities which are in the top 20 in the country: Caltech, Stanford, UC Berkeley, UCLA. More than any other single nation in the world except the United States itself. But if you look at the Cal State University system, which is the largest university in the world, it has a student body where about 20% of the students in the Cal State system do not even have a proficiency in English. So again, pretty amazing. In situations in which you are spending enormous amounts of money in education, California public school test scores right now rank between 44th and 46th in the nation. Its infrastructure and roads are 42nd to 45th. When I go back to California, drive some of the same roads I was driving when I was working in a machine shop. That was 50 years ago. They're the same roads. They have not even changed anything since that time. So again, you can see that money has been spent elsewhere. So it brings him to his 3 points. Point number 1, what he calls the keep. Lots of highly educated people are congregated in California's coastal corridor of some 30 million from La Jolla in San Diego all the way to Napa Valley. That's Google, that's Apple, it's Facebook, it's, all sorts of things related to that. And, of course, this is a place where individuals are well paid, highly educated, affluent, and really almost live a different world than the rest of people in California. His second point is what he calls the grapes of wrath in reverse. Love that. He says in the last decade and a half, about 6 million people in California over the age of 25 left the state. And in the last 30 years, perhaps as many as 10 million have led as well. Now, there are all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's political ideology. Sometimes it's quality of life. Maybe it's a failing infrastructure, the schools, whatever. But the bottom line is, whenever you actually say, well, why don't they stay and start a business? If you look at the state-by-state rankings in terms of business climate, that's looking at regulations and taxes, California rates anywhere between the 47th and the 50th worst state. In other words, you could start a business in almost any other state but California and do better than doing what you are doing in California. And I, of course, shared on this program before some of these companies that have figured out how quickly they can build a fast food restaurant in Texas in about a month to 6 weeks, and how many years it takes to build one of those in California with all the different kinds of permits and things of that nature. And then his third point, the crime whose name must not be spoken. He says, third, both legal and illegal immigration has also radically changed the demography of the state. it's not just about the 40% of the nation's 11 to 20 million immigrants. Don't you love it? We don't know whether we have 11 million immigrants or 20 million. But anyway, and that's just in the state of California. We don't even know. But anyway, a state in which now 1 in 4 residents was not born in the United States. And so he talks about some of the issues that raises in terms of cost of Medi-Cal births and all sorts of things and crossings of the border and the rest. But basically he says this: the effect of so many immigrant poor has certainly transformed California into not so much 2 different states as 2 different worlds. A highly sophisticated, highly regulated, and uniform coastal gentry versus an impoverished interior of largely immigrant and first-generation Californians who have little ability or desire to adhere to California's labyrinth of rules and regulations. So again, you have to see that what you are dealing with is just a very different kind of world. At the end, he simply says this: you have really one population has wealth and privilege enough to create a Garden of Eden with the proviso that it need not experience firsthand any of the downsides of an envisioned utopia. The second population is largely that of first and second generation immigrants, millions of them without legality, and many of them poor and dependent on generous state entitlements and non-enforcement of a myriad of rules and regulations. And then there is that third zombie population, he calls, those who want to, or in fact are preparing to, follow the millions who left. They're convinced that they lack the connections and the clout of the wealthy that would let them navigate around the new regulatory morass, and they pay more in taxes than they receive in state services. In the end, the diminishing middle class lacks the romance of the distant poor and the panache of the coastal affluent. So it's pretty sad, but it is an illustration of a state where I was born and grew up in, which was seen as the Golden State, which now finds itself really with 2 different worlds in the same state. Let's take a break. We come back, we'll get into some of the other issues in the news. I'll start off with just, again, a summary of what's happening right now in the House of Representatives with new leadership, Democratic leadership in the House of Representatives. Then we'll be talking with Gaston Mooney, who is the president of Blaze Media, talking about this interesting merger of CRTV as well as the Blaze, and we'll get into some of those issues, and then we'll get into a few other topics that I've been waiting to get into. And as I mentioned, at 2 o'clock, Abby Johnson will be joining us, and we'll spend some time talking about Planned Parenthood and about her new movie, Unplanned, and some of the great stories that have already come out in the filming of that film, and the opportunity for you to encourage your friends and loved ones and others to attend the movie and maybe even change your minds about Planned Parenthood and the subject of abortion. Got a lot to look forward to. All of it coming up right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We have got a lot to talk about. In just a minute, we're going to be talking about this conservative media merger. If you go to the website, pointofview.net, you'll see this article from the Washington Times, bringing together CRTV, which I've always loved. I was one of the initial subscribers and always appreciate Mark Levin and the other people there. Now merging with The Blaze, and that would be, of course, Glenn Beck and all of those, and just a phenomenal opportunity to talk about that in just a minute. We'll be talking with our good friend Gaston Mooney, who is the president of Blaze Media, and we'll get a better perspective on what's happening there. But just before we do so, we'll spend more time later this hour getting into some more detail, but I just thought I'd let you know that, as you would imagine, today, of course, Nancy Pelosi was again elected Speaker of the House. And this is pretty significant in that, first of all, you might remember 8 years ago, she was handing the gavel over to John Boehner. Now, of course, the gavel will go from Paul Ryan back to her. And this is significant because it is, first of all, she's the only woman to have ever held this office. And now one of the very few elected officials who is returning back to that office. Last time a speaker regained the gavel was more than a half century ago, so we may get into that in a little more detail. Might also point out that she put in the gallery there people like singer Tony Bennett and Grateful Dead drummer Mickey Hart and television personality Tim Gunn. You had the mayor of the District of Columbia. You had the presidents of Georgetown University, Trinity, Washington University, to mention just a few. So again, lots of things taking place right now, including after, of course, the electing the speaker, the swearing in of the new members. Now, when they swear in, there are pictures taken later after the swearing in. And I thought I might just mention that incoming Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib actually is going to use Thomas Jefferson's centuries-old Quran. You might remember when Representative Keith Ellison, also a Muslim, was sworn in a number of years ago, 2007. He used that same Quran. And you might say, well, why did Thomas Jefferson have a Quran? Well, it's because he wanted to understand a little bit more about the Barbary pirates. Matter of fact, this article in the Washington Post points out that if you look at the introduction into this particular English translation of the Quran, which is, like I said, centuries old, you have George Sale saying that whatever use an impartial version of the Quran might be in other respects, it's absolutely necessary to undeceive those who, from the ignorant or unfair translations which have appeared, have entertained too favorable an opinion of the original. The idea was, we want you to have a clear and honest English translation of the Quran so you'll really understand what these Muslims are really like. So I do always think it's kind of ironic that whenever a Muslim, whether Keith Ellison or Rashida Tlaib, actually are sworn in, they use that Quran, which was obtained not because he was a great fan of the Muslim faith, but actually wondered what indeed, if they're going to send the troops to the shores of Tripoli, what they were going to be encountering. But nevertheless, that's a story that we'll get into a little bit later this hour. But let me welcome to the microphone Gaston Mooney. He's the president of Blaze Media. Before working in the media, Gaston served as a policy advisor to the United States Senate for the Senate Steering Committee, also worked in the administration of Bush 43, and also in the U.S. House of Representatives, and an individual that is now overseeing this incredible merger. Gaston, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Explain this a little bit. I would imagine most of our listeners are a little bit familiar with CRTV and the Blaze, but as we've posted here, this article from the Washington Times, this makes you a major player. Talk about what has actually been taking place here.
Yeah, so we got together, and we've seen what's been happening in the media space with the left is continually moving further and further away outside of the norms of our society, and it's created basically a space where the American people are basically underserved right now in the media space, whether it's news, opinion, and even entertainment. It doesn't take much for one to survey the media landscape and to realize that there is kind of a real opening for a certain type of programming and content. And so we got together with the Blaze and realized that there was kind of an opportunity here that's taking place with viewing habits that are changing, where people are starting to consume more content over their iPhone, their Roku, their Apple TV, over they call it OTT, over the top devices. And we said, we think that there is a need in this country for a large conservative media company that is pro-America, pro-free speech, and pro-Bill of Rights. And so that's kind of what we set out to do, is that anyone that believes in the Constitution, they believe in the Bill of Rights, they don't have to agree on everything, because we have plenty of hosts that have different viewpoints on policy, on different politicians. They have different viewpoints. And we think that's actually very healthy. And we think that those debates are interesting. But at the end of the day, everyone agrees on the basic core fundamental principles. And we want people to have a home with us that share that view. And so we think that there's a big opening right now in the marketplace for that type of content.
Well, and again, to give you some sense and give our listeners a sense of the diversity, you think of Mark Levin, and he's kind of the scholar, the legal scholar. I think almost everybody's familiar with Glenn Beck, an individual that will use not only facts and figures, but drawings and humor and all of the rest. Steve Crowder, Louder Than Crowder, and even you might mention maybe one or two other individuals, Eric Bolling and some of those too. And that's just a small list of individuals. So it gives you a sense that you're not just talking about news or opinion or entertainment. You're talking about all of the above, aren't you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've got some content that's we publish on YouTube and Facebook. We have podcasts. We're trying to reach people wherever they are. So if they want to consume some linear cable, we have a presence there. If they want to subscribe and catch us anywhere they want on demand, on any device, at blazetv.com, we have a presence there. But we also have, another type of content. We have, for example, Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty. He has a show called In the Woods with Phil, where he just uses everyday items from working on his farm and working on his land and his house and interacting with Uncle Si and Miss Kay, et cetera, to make these incredible points of just, basic common sense points of what's going on in society and culture, and even political as well. So we try to offer a little something for everyone. And what we're really trying to do too is reach a lot of the college kids with tours on campuses and a lot of our talent. We had Turning Point USA just had their big summit right before Christmas, and we had 3 or 4 hosts out there speaking at it. So we're really trying to offer programming that is not just for the traditionally politically active, but also for those who are getting more into conservatism and learning more about kind of what the principles are. And they see this insanity from the left. They see these, even with this next presidential election, these calls for socialism, for massive indoctrination. They know that something is up. And so, there's a big moment that's happening right now.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue for just a few more minutes with Gaston Mooney. Let me just also say that he'll be with us a little bit longer, and if you have a comment or a question, this is the time to call, because once he's gone, of course, I might be able to answer him. But if you have a comment or question, maybe you've been listening to or watching Blaze TV or something like that, or maybe you'd like to know a little bit more about how to promote it, feel free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We've got a lot to cover today, but we'll keep him on a little bit longer for some content and some conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Much has been written about the millennial generation, but the most readable and interesting is the book by Grant Skeldon, The Passion Generation. He has been a regular participant on the Point of View radio talk show Millennial Roundtable and brings lots of insight into this generation. He is the founder of the Initiative Network that seeks to train millennials to be Christ-loving, city-changing, church-investing, disciple-making local missionaries. Although the book focuses on millennials, it's really about discipleship. His argument is the critical component missing is discipleship. He explains we don't have a millennial problem. Instead, we have a discipleship problem. Our culture is feeling the result of a mentorless, fatherless generation. As you open the book, you will discover that it is very different from most other books. There are lots of diagrams and pictures that drive home his key points. When Grant Skeldon was on my radio program, he explained that idea came to him when an artist on a whiteboard started drawing and diagramming his message while he was giving it. He thought it would be a good idea to include such visual aids inside the book. You will also notice a device icon while reading through the book. This is a key that instructs you to pull up videos on a website that illustrate and supplement the material in that section of the book. And even the acknowledgments section is different because it features line drawings of the people who were influential in Grant's life. You can read the book as an individual, but I think its greatest power can be found in studying it with others. Discipleship is more than merely the transfer of information. It involves life change that takes place when we're intimately involved in each other's life. The book can be a catalyst for discipleship. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Gaston Mooney with us for just a few more minutes, and if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, president of Blaze Media. And Gaston, before we take some phone calls, I thought maybe you could give us a little bit of an understanding about the Blaze. It's kind of interesting because sometimes when we will have a guest in studio, they have come into town because they've been on with Glenn Beck and then have come on over here. Some of my co-hosts have actually been on the Blaze. I've never even been over there. We've never had Glenn Beck on our program, but I do hear kind of indirectly about the facilities that are over there in the Dallas area. And, of course, then CRTV is, Mark Levin and wherever any of those individuals are located. But talk about some of the production that results in the radio broadcast, the TV broadcast, and the rest.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Mark is in an undisclosed location. He's from that, the hidden bunker.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a good presence. Obviously, Blaze Media has a good presence there in Dallas with the Mercury radio studios there. We've got a good presence in D.C. as well, and also a New York office as well. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to put together facilities that can take on starting media companies. The barriers to entries have dropped. Cameras have gotten smaller. What used to just take your a satellite truck to reach millions of people, you can now do with an iPhone on Facebook Live. So technology has really transformed media, and at the same time, it's made it easier to make content on the go. For example, Eric Bolling's show we shoot on a street corner in Washington D.C. We never were able to do that 3 to 4 years ago with the equipment they had available that you needed for something like that. And so we've tried to take the best equipment that's out there, the kind of the latest and cutting edge, that's the smallest and utilize it to bring people interesting stories, to bring them content, that's kind of outside the box that they just won't see anywhere else. Let's think we say about Eric Boland's shows. His show is the show that they never would have put on cable TV because, frankly, you couldn't do it if you tried to do it by cable TV standards. We're digital first, and that gives us a lot of flexibility to have overtime segments to talk further, to look at different discussions and angles and stories, and take cameras where they've never been before. So it's been a lot of fun in that regard.
Well, and I think that's another aspect of what you're talking about. I've noticed a while back when I was watching this piece where Eric Boland was interviewing Alan Watts and some of the other individuals on the street. I thought, isn't that interesting that they do it that way? But nevertheless, that's what is kind of the new genre where it's kind of on the scene, and it doesn't necessarily have, if you will, all the production values, or, as you said, the time limits that are there. And I think if you're going to reach the younger generation, we do a millennial roundtable with Nick Pitts and Grant Skeldon, who I am talking about today in his new book and things like that. The millennial generation is much more willing to watch a YouTube video that doesn't have a lot of production value, but just gets you into the content. And so in some respects, this doesn't have to be quite as slick and as polished. And as a result, maybe is going to make it a lot easier for other future kind of an entrepreneurial types of reporters and opinion makers and commentators and things like that to have a place in this new genre.
That's exactly right. I think there's a real desire out there for authenticity. And I think that as long as the audience can see that the content is authentic and it's not, basically a line, some preset, predetermined type of thing. I mean, and that's what we want. We want our hosts are transparent. We openly, admit that we're a conservative company, and we don't try to have this fake aura of objectivity that a lot of the other liberal news outlets try to put together. And so in that case, I think we're being even more upfront and objective by admitting that we are. That we do have a viewpoint. We do have an angle for a lot of our stories and our content.
Let's take some phone calls. We'll head out to Florida first. Jane, you're on with Gaston Mooney. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, and I just have one quick question. I've been listening to you, and you talk about your angle for conservatism and how it's what you think college students need and want out there. And I wonder what makes you think you're right? Why do you think they need to hear your point of view?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. One is because we've seen it from different these different events we've been to, whether it's CPAC where they have young people, or Turning Point that has a variety of chapters across the country. I've seen it just in some of the discussions online, the YouTube channels, even just our own analytics of the people we can tell who are watching our videos on Facebook, who are watching them on YouTube and listening to the podcast. Our audience skews much younger, and so I think that just the data, the pulse on the pulse of what's happening out there, our ear to the ground, is telling us the same thing, that there is kind of a desire for some of this. I think that some people are listening to it, and in a lot of cases, conservatism has become kind of countercultural, and so I think it's kind of got a little bit of an edge feel to it, to where everyone in the university is saying this, but then you've got that person you listen to out there in the media, whether it's like Ben Shapiro or Ali Stuckey or Steven Crowder, who's saying something that's different. And it kind of has that, that forbidden type feel to it, even though it's basically, the same stuff we've been talking about for years. It's just kind of repackaged in a different way.
Well, one of the things I am noticing is it's providing another avenue. You mentioned one of those individuals that used to be part of our Millennial Roundtable, Ali Stuckey. By the way, she's pregnant, in case anybody has not also been following her lately. But, here she was on this program for a while and then went over to The Blaze. We've seen some of these other individuals. Matter of fact, most of the people I've just mentioned a minute ago, almost all of them at one time or another have been on this program. Now, many of them already had a platform long before that. But you're providing just an opportunity for individuals to maybe be able to get a voice out. And back to Jane's question, why accept this point of view? Well, it's giving a point of view that I think by and large correct me if I'm wrong, most of the participants there tend to be pretty much pro-life, pro-family, tend to believe in kind of a strict construction or originalist view of the Constitution. Now, that's going to be varying from person to person. So there is a fair amount of diversity within the various voices at Blaze Media. But at the same time, there's sort of these core positions and principles that are held together, don't you think?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. And I think that used to be the case, if you look back even, years ago in politics, where there wasn't a huge divide between necessarily Democrats and Republicans like there is today. I mean, you had, the majority of the senators, Democrat senators at the time voted for a border wall, border security, and different things like that. And there were it was a bipartisan concern on immigration issues and things like that. And now today it's completely split, and things are just kind of you can see it kind of pulling apart at the seams.
One of the things I did want to mention is we do have a link to theblaze.com, and you have an opportunity if people want to try it for free. Of course, as I've said, I've already a CRT TV subscriber, so it's really kind of easy for me to get into that particular area. But some people might say, you know what, I want to watch it for a while. I want to listen to the radio. I want to watch TV. I want to download some videos, and then I'll make that decision. And you've made it possible for people to do so, haven't you?
Yeah, we have. And so if somebody's not convinced whether they want to sign up or not, we have a free trial that's going on right now. So it's 30 days. Come in, sign up, go to blazetv.com. You can access the free trial. If you don't like it, cancel. Just all we ask is you tell us what you didn't like, what we can do better because we want to improve. And I think people are going to really enjoy it. And they can, download that app on their iPhone, Android, any type of device. And, they can watch it on their own time, whether they want to watch it live or if they want to watch it on demand. So.
And one of the things you will find are some of the individuals we interview actually are there as well. So if you later want to get more information or hear a different interview with the same guest, you can go there. And many times they will go and spend some time with Glenn Beck and then come over here to this studio here at Point of View. So if nothing else, Gaston, I wanted to educate some people about this merger. And I wish you well. And thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, again, I just thought it would be great for all of you to know a little bit more about that. If you find yourself saying, okay, I need to read a little bit more, click on his picture. It will take you to the View website there. And then, of course, we have this one article that appeared in Washington Times, which I thought was kind of a good summary of that. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more, this is another place to go to get good information. And do we agree with everything that's said there? Of course not. Not all of them agree with each other because it's a rather significant forum for views that maybe you aren't going to necessarily hear through the mainstream media. So I just wanted to let you know about that. When we come back, we'll spend a little more time getting into a couple of issues unfolding today. In particular, once you have, of course, a Speaker of the House, once we have members sworn in, what does the House of Representatives plan to do? Well, we'll talk about that right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue your conversation. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me give you a programming note, and that is in about a half an hour, we're going to be talking with Abby Johnson. You may remember her as an individual that worked for Planned Parenthood, then eventually had very strong concerns, that's probably putting it mildly, with what was happening at that Planned Parenthood clinic, became pro-life, and then even became a pro-life activist. She's been on the program with us before as we've talked about her book, Unplanned. Well, we have a movie coming out called Unplanned. And just the other day, I talked about that movie because one of the actresses, matter of fact, the main actress who plays Abby in the movie, Ashley Bratcher, has her own story, which we'll talk about in just a minute. As a matter of fact, my commentary tomorrow is the story about Ashley Bratcher, an actress in the film Unplanned. So she will be with us in about a half an hour. And if you have comments or questions about abortion, Planned Parenthood, or about this upcoming movie, we certainly do welcome your phone calls. But today, we've had, of course, a number of things happening in the House of Representatives, not the least of which, of course, is the fact that now Democrats control the House of Representatives, which I think makes it even less likely that you are going to have a funding for the border wall. And right now, what has been proposed by the incoming Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and the leadership is that we now have put, they said, two bills together which still have funding priorities, but they actually do a couple of things that continue these funding of these various cabinet offices, but prevent any money going for the building of a wall. And so what you have here is a situation in which they are going to use, quote, their new majority to vote through measures that would reopen nearly all of the shuttered federal agencies through the end of September at funding levels Senate Republicans have already agreed to. Those spending bills contain scores of priorities and pet projects for people on both sides. But the Democratic proposal has one exception. The Department of Homeland Security, which oversees border security, would keep its current level of funding with no new money for border wall at all, which is even less than what's been offered in the Senate, if you remember. I mean, we heard 1.6, we heard 1.4, we heard 1.3. Of course, President Trump wants 5.7, but nevertheless, $1 billion. You can see that that would be actually even more extreme than what has been offered by Chuck Schumer at the moment. But nevertheless, this was an attempt to move something from the House into the Senate that would end, are we on the 18th day? Something like that, in terms of the shutdown. So that's where we are right now. And, of course, that will be the first item of agenda. And then some of the other items which have been proposed already. The incoming Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was asked, would she hold hearings on Medicare for all? She said she would, so Medicare for all may be one of those issues. You have some, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, that have been talking about this idea of a Green New Deal, which maybe we can get to a little bit later. But for just a few minutes, though, let's, if we can, focus on this idea of funding. The president, of course, has asked for more than $5 billion for a border wall, far beyond the 1.3 that Democrats were planning to vote on. And now, if you look at this bill being proposed in the House, assuming this is correct, and again, I'm just reading an article that appeared in the Washington Post and don't have any additional information, but if that's the case, it looks like it would even provide less than some of those that are proposed. But nevertheless, the original idea was $1.3 billion, all the way up to $1.6 billion from the Democrats, and around numbers about $5.7 billion by the president for border money, and that is kind of the big issue. One of the big questions I want to put on the table for just a minute and get your comments is, what does illegal immigration cost us? Now, as I answer this question, I don't need you calling in to saying it doesn't matter what the cost is. Okay, I understand that. If something is right, you do whatever you can within your budget. Something is wrong, doesn't matter if it costs very little. It's okay, I already understand that. But there are a lot of numbers being thrown around here, and I thought for just a minute I would help you at least understand how people have come up with those numbers, and to show you why you've got to really treat every one of them with a little bit of care, or else have a little bit of skepticism, or take them with a grain of salt, whatever metaphor you want to use. The number that you hear so often being thrown around is that during their lifetime, an illegal alien, an illegal immigrant, an undocumented worker, whatever you want to call those individuals, costs the country about $70,000. Now, where do they come up with those numbers? Well, it was an attempt to try to put together a couple of issues to look at the average net fiscal cost. That would be taxes minus services that are used, and then to divide that by the number of individuals that are here who are illegal. Now, the first problem, which we've talked about before, whenever we get into these numbers, Nick Pitts and I go back and forth on this, we can't even necessarily always agree on the number of people that are here illegally. So when you can't have your base number with any kind of accuracy, can you see all the other problems that surface? I hope you can see that. But using that number, they came up with about $65,000 during the lifetime, and then adjusted to 2018 dollars, it would be $69,570, or in round numbers, about $70,000. So supposedly the cost of an illegal alien for a lifetime would be $70,000. Now, a lot of this comes from the study that was done by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And there are, I don't want to get too technical here because the more you get into the weeds, more people's eyes glaze over. But the whole estimate that is done by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine also use a concept, don't want to get too technical here, called a net present value. And so the final argument being made in this particular article is that this National Academy of Sciences and Medicine long-term fiscal estimate uses the concept of net present value, which is commonly employed by economists. True. This approach has the effect of reducing the size of the net fiscal gain and drain that unskilled immigrants create because costs and benefits years from now are valued less relative to the immediate cost. So if the net present value concept is not used, then the actual net lifetime cost for illegal immigrants could be then $125,000 to $135,000, or almost twice as much. So when you have people that can't tell you how many illegal aliens or illegal immigrants or undocumented workers are in the country, and then when you have a range from $70,000 to $135,000, you can kind of get a sense that you have to be really careful with those numbers that get tossed around. But for those of you that are watching online, what I thought I would do is, if nothing else, show you a diagram that I think illustrates only so well what is actually taking place. And that is, what they're looking at is, first of all, the various federal expenditures for an individual that is here illegally, then look at the state and local expenditures, and then look at the fact that these individuals, if they're working here and they're illegal, probably have a Social Security card of somebody who's died. And so that means they're paying taxes, which they'll never be able to obtain because they don't have their name there. So then you have the federal taxes that are paid, and then the state and local taxes, some of which, of course, paid simply because you're paying sales tax or other things. And you take the expenditures minus the income, and you come up with the numbers. And so, if nothing else, it was an attempt to try to show how, in a fairly complex series of equations, you come up with a number. And if you want to accept the number of $70,000 or $135,000, certainly. The way you get some of these groups, for example, that are more open borders oriented, is they pay a lot of attention to the taxes which are paid and the net benefits, but they don't look at some of the expenditures, either indirect or, in other cases, ancillary expenditures. And so the bottom line is, you can come up with different numbers, but the bottom line is that those numbers get thrown around quite a bit. And if nothing else, I wanted you for just a minute to be a little more careful when you start throwing around a figure like $70,000 of a cost by an illegal alien over a lifetime, to know how that is calculated and the multitude of assumptions that go into it. And this is, I think, one of the saddest commentaries that we have right now. We can't even with great precision tell you exactly how many people are here illegally. We can't tell you with any precision how much benefit they provide to us and how much cost they actually extract. But the estimates seem to suggest that in most cases, until we get them out of the shadows, we are paying a lot that most people don't really take into account. If you'd like to join us, though, 1-800-351-1212. Got a lot more to talk about right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. James Gillespie Blaine had an interesting life. He served as Speaker of the House of Congress and in the United States Senate. He twice served as Secretary of State, holding the position under 3 separate presidents. He even sought the presidency, losing to Grover Cleveland. But Blaine's most notorious legacy, however, is an amendment that bears his name. Blaine got his idea from a fiery speech delivered by President Grant at the height of a national controversy over the nation's public schools and whether religion had any place within them. In 1875, President Grant declared, "Leave the matter of religion to the family altar, the church, and the private school, supported entirely by private contributions. Keep the church and state forever separate." Days later, Blaine introduced a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution that would prevent any government aid to, quote, sectarian schools, especially Catholic schools. His amendment failed, but various states borrowed his proposal and their constitutions were amended instead. Today, almost 40 states have a constitutional provision that prevents government aid to religious institutions. These amendments have empowered states to legally discriminate against religious organizations when they perform the same work secular institutions do. That prejudice led Justice Thomas to write of Blaine amendments in the 1999 decision of Mitchell v. Helms, quote, "This doctrine, born of bigotry, should be buried now." To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me mention again that in the next hour, Abby Johnson will be with us. We'll be talking about Unplanned and the movie and the book. And I think you'll really appreciate her conversation. Love to hear from some of you that have comments or questions about abortion, Planned Parenthood, and much, much more. Let me mention, too, that if you go to our website, you'll find many of the articles, one which I'm going to talk about in just a minute by our friend David French, Why Twitter is Even More Toxic Than You Think. It is the second article we've posted there. But before I get to that, let me also mention that my Viewpoints commentary today is on the book by Grant Skeldon. If you've listened to this program any length of time, know that he oftentimes joins us for our Wednesday roundtable. Matter of fact, next Wednesday, Nick Pitts will be the host, and Grant Skeldon will be there. We, a while back, talked about his book, The Passion Generation, and if you would like to know more about his book, certainly we have information about that on our website. Also, I did a commentary on it today, The Passion Generation. And so if you'd like to find out more, you can go to the website and get that commentary. And I might just mention that there's a red button there where you can sign up to receive my commentaries every single day, Monday through Friday. We also send you Penna Dexter's commentary on Saturday, which she writes a weekly commentary, and those are available free of charge. Yesterday, by the way, I recommended that some of you might want to take my commentary on the 7 challenges churches face in 2019 and to read it and then to pass it on to a pastor, maybe an elder, a deacon, or something like that. And quite a number of you did so, and I would still want to encourage you to do so. So, for example, if you know somebody that is in church leadership that maybe doesn't have a chance to listen to Point of View, all we're really suggesting is you send to them this 2-minute commentary, which actually would probably only take them about a minute and a half at most to read, but it really kind of delineates some of the potential threats that churches might face and just alerts them to that. And so you could send that to them, and I certainly would encourage you to do so if you have not done so. And today, since we're talking about the millennial generation, you know how that is certainly one of our focus points here at Point of View. So if you'd like to maybe educate someone else about what I think is really one of the best books on the millennial generation by a fellow millennial, Grant Skeldon, you could then certainly take that commentary, read it, print it, or maybe digitally send it to other individuals that maybe would be interested in learning more about millennials, including maybe send it to somebody who's in the millennial generation. So, again, those are resources we make available right here at Point of View. I would encourage you to take advantage of them. Just before we take a break, though, let me mention that one of the other articles I've posted here is by David French, Why Twitter is Even More Toxic Than You Think. Now, what's so interesting here is that he says one of the first things you learn when you start your professional life is that people who care the most have the most influence. He says it's true in every business, from entertainment to law to politics, that oftentimes it's a few angry men and women that can show up even at a school board meeting that can change a policy, a few letters to the editor, a few letters to your member of Congress, a few emails, a few phone calls can make such a difference. And so he's found out that oftentimes it isn't the size, but the intensity that makes a difference. And he says this is why I think he thinks most people don't understand the incredible impact of Twitter. He says by measure of active users, it's a lightweight. Facebook is the behemoth with more than 2.2 billion people on the platform. YouTube has 1.9 billion, Instagram 1 billion. Twitter is way down at a mere 335 million, which is still very significant, by the way, but okay. But in public influence, it punches far above its weight. He says, why? Because it's where cultural kingmakers congregate, thus where conventional wisdom is formed and shaped, often instantly and thoughtlessly. And both of those are very important. He talks about how in some respects we already have kind of a sorting that takes place. We've talked about on this program the so-called big sort. People that are conservative tend to watch Fox News. They tend to read the Wall Street Journal. They tend to maybe even listen to or watch The Blaze. We just talked about that. People are progressive, tend to watch MSNBC, maybe the mainstream media. They read the New York Times, the Washington Post. You know how it goes. And so this is certainly true in terms of broadcast, and it's certainly true in terms of Twitter, although you will certainly have a number of people that will get onto Twitter accounts so they can then disagree with individuals as well. But the point he's making here is that Twitter really very quickly can make or break somebody. He doesn't talk about this, but I remember one individual that made some really questionable comment, Twitter comment, when she got in an airplane. By the time the airplane landed, I think she was flying from South Africa to the United States, her almost her reputation had been completely destroyed. Now, that's a little bit extreme, but nevertheless, here, David French puts it this way. If you're offline for even a day or two, entire virtual controversies with real-world consequences can come and go without your knowledge. Old tweets surface, people lose their jobs, politicians advance or retreat, and hardly anyone outside of Twitter knows what happened. And the point he's making is Twitter is really becoming kind of the make or break kind of organ that is out there. And so, again, as we talk about that, we have to begin to understand that it also is part of the great sort, because he says the leaders of both political parties, allied activists, and their constellation of vocal followers grow even more radicalized. Real-world decisions continue to be made in response to temper tantrums by a surprisingly small number of people, because after all, those are the only voices heard in the heat of the moment, and they're always more influential than those who remain silent. And if you've ever heard that comment before, the world is not run by the silent majority. Oftentimes, the world is run by the vocal minority. And you would be surprised at how small that minority might be. I've written some commentaries, some of which plays upon the great material that David French has put together in the past, talking about how many of these Twitter explosions actually are generated by bots and other things to make it look like there's a lot more people upset about an issue than really are. And so, if nothing else, it seems to me that what we need to do is be wary of some of the things that are said on Twitter. And how many times around this table have we remarked and even complained and lamented about some of the Twitter comments made even by the president? It's here to stay, and you may say, well, I'm not going to get on Twitter. That's fine, but unfortunately, it's the place where a lot of decisions are being made, and it's also where certain careers are being destroyed almost instantaneously. So again, just a piece that I wanted you to read in its entirety by David French, who was in studio with us last fall. Next time he's in town, let's see if we can put him on here again, because he's got great insight into a number of different aspects, including what is happening in this area of social media. But let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend some time talking with Abby Johnson. Again, if you're not familiar, individual that worked with Planned Parenthood for, I believe it was 8 years. Then she was able to assist with an ultrasound abortion and was horrified by it, became pro-life, became a pro-life activist, wrote the book Unplanned, but also now we have the new film coming out in March, Unplanned, and also want to tell the a remarkable story about the actress who was chosen to portray her, Ashley Bratcher, because she has a story herself, which we'll talk about as well. And so if you have some comments about the pro-life issue, about Planned Parenthood, and about abortion, we certainly welcome your phone calls in the next hour. And if you'd like to find some of the articles we are referring to today, they're all available at our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, you might also click on the button that says donate. After all, we are dependent upon your financial gifts to bring this program. And as we start this new year of 2019, we do need your financial support. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Topic this hour, for the first half hour at least, is abortion and pro-life issues and Planned Parenthood. And if you remember last week, we got talking about the story of Ashley Bratcher, who is the actress playing in this upcoming film, Unplanned. Powerful story. We'll talk about it again in case you did not have a chance to hear it. By the way, I might just mention I write my commentaries about a week in advance, and tomorrow's commentary is entitled Unplanned, and it tells this powerful story. Of course, the film itself and the book by Abby Johnson is powerful enough, but this backstory of the actress who plays her in the film is also very powerful. So a lot to talk about. And again, if you aren't already receiving my commentary, you might at least want to get the one tomorrow. Powerful story. And we also have a link to the video, which is at unplannedfilm.com, which we'll talk about in just a minute. We welcome back to the broadcast Abby Johnson. You may know her story, having worked with, for about 8 years, Planned Parenthood, and then one day assisted with an ultrasound-guided abortion. And she was just horrified by what she saw and became pro-life, as well as a pro-life activist. Began to be a real advocate for what was taking place. Now, Planned Parenthood was not thrilled with her going out there and telling the story, so they tried to put a gag order on her, and that didn't work very well. That gag order was thrown out pretty quickly. But nevertheless, of course, has written this nationally best-selling book called Unplanned, and now we have the movie coming out. So, Abby Johnson, welcome back to Point of View.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on.
What an incredible number of stories. You know, if I had taken you back to 2009 when you were observing that abortion, I don't think you would anticipate what's unfolded here in the last about 10 years. But it is pretty amazing and remarkable, isn't it?
It is. It's yeah. I definitely would not have expected all of this. But yeah, I mean, you know, God's plan is always better than ours, and we're just sort of following it right now.
Well, again, we're going to talk about the movie, but I guess the best way to understand the movie is to have you tell your story. I just told the sketchy parts of it, but take us into some detail, because a lot of people that are listening to this program have read your book, have heard you on this program or others, but I know there's some others that are saying, okay, it's the first time I've ever heard of Abby Johnson. Tell us a story, if you might.
Sure. So I started working at Planned Parenthood in 2001 as a college student, and then just continued to work my way up in the organization. Eventually started running a clinic that provided abortions, and I became the clinic director. And then in 2009, there had been a lot of things going on with the organization that had concerned me, fulfilling abortion quotas and different things like that. But ultimately, I ended up leaving in October of 2009 after witnessing a live ultrasound-guided abortion procedure where I witnessed a 13-week-old baby in the womb fight and struggle for his life against the abortion instruments. And I knew then that I was on the wrong side of this issue. And that, while I really believed that I was fighting for women and helping women, I realized that not only was I hurting their children, helping to kill their children, but I was hurting these women as well, and I was not really helping them. And so I ended up leaving Planned Parenthood, and then Planned Parenthood, like you said, took me to court, tried to get a gag order against me so I wouldn't be able to tell my story. That obviously failed, since here I am talking about it.
Right.
You can't sue somebody just for, becoming pro-life. So, so that's what I do now. So I go around and share my story, exposing abortion, exposing the abortion industry, and really trying to help people find healing resources. There's so many people who have been touched by abortion in our country, and there's a lot of wounded people. And so, really just trying to help them get connected with healing resources is a big part of what I do as well.
You're also the founder of And There Were None, and that's a ministry really designed to assist abortion clinic workers to come out of the industry, and that has been incredibly successful, hasn't it?
It has. We founded it, and there were none in mid-2012. And then, not really knowing if it was going to be successful or not, just sort of trusting the Lord. And He put this on my heart. And so we stepped out in faith to do it. There had never been a national organization to help abortion clinic workers transition out of the industry and into life-affirming work and into a place of healing and into a relationship with Christ. And so we wanted to do that, and we thought, if we had 10 to 12 workers leave a year, that would be huge success. But now, several years later, we've helped 479 abortion clinic workers leave their jobs and come into a relationship with Christ. And it's been really beautiful. Just to be a witness and to help be that bridge that brings them into that relationship.
Well, again, just lots of things happening. But let's go to the movie. And again, I am encouraging people to go to the website. There's a place where you can find out about getting tickets, hosting an event. It's still months in advance. I understand that, but I'd like to give it some advance notice. And then as we get closer, we'll come back to the topic. But this has been pretty amazing, and we talked just the other day about the story of Ashley Bratcher, who is an actress, and she was told to play, when she got the call to play the role, she was told to pack for 7 weeks and be ready in a few hours, and so she didn't have a chance to tell anybody, including her mother. And she knew that her mother had had an abortion 3 years before she was born, but I'll let you tell the rest of the story because you probably can tell better than Ashley. Every time Ashley tries to tell the story, she breaks down, and I'd love you to tell the rest of that story because not only is your story on the film really powerful, the backstory of what happened to Ashley Bratcher is pretty powerful as well, isn't it?
It is. So she was, on a plane very quickly, headed to Oklahoma to film. That's where we filmed the movie, and she hadn't had an opportunity to talk to her parents about what she was doing. She had to leave so fast. And so she ended up getting a phone call from her mom on a Sunday. They had been filming for a few days, and Sunday is their only day off. And so she had gotten a phone call from her mom, and so she answered the call and told her mom about the project she was working on, and she was doing this film unplanned, and told her, my story. And her mom just really broke down. And Ashley knew that her mom had had an abortion when she was young, when she was about 16. And that was sort of it. So she thought, well, that's probably why my mom is so upset, because she's been affected by abortion.
Sure. Let me jump in real quickly because we have to take one of those mandatory breaks. And this is a perfect cliffhanger. Sure. Perfect cliffhanger. And we'll come back and tell the rest of the story because there was a reason her mother was crying. You'll find out right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Much has been written about the millennial generation, but the most readable and interesting is the book by Grant Skeldon, The Passion Generation. He has been a regular participant on the Point of View radio talk show Millennial Roundtable and brings lots of insight into this generation. He is the founder of the Initiative Network that seeks to train millennials to be Christ-loving, city-changing, church-investing, disciple-making local missionaries. Although the book focuses on millennials, it's really about discipleship. His argument is the critical component missing is discipleship. He explains we don't have a millennial problem. Instead, we have a discipleship problem. Our culture is feeling the result of a mentorless, fatherless generation. As you open the book, you will discover that it is very different from most other books. There are lots of diagrams and pictures that drive home his key points. When Grant Skeldon was on my radio program, he explained that idea came to him when an artist on a whiteboard started drawing and diagramming his message while he was giving it. He thought it would be a good idea to include such visual aids inside the book. You will also notice a device icon while reading through the book. This is a key that instructs you to pull up videos on a website that illustrate and supplement the material in that section of the book. And even the acknowledgments section is different because it features line drawings of the people who were influential in Grant's life. You can read the book as an individual, but I think its greatest power can be found in studying it with others. Discipleship is more than merely the transfer of information. It involves life change that takes place when we're intimately involved in each other's life. The book can be a catalyst for discipleship. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Kevin Johnson with us. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Abby, you were talking about the fact that Ashley Bratcher finds herself in Oklahoma, gets a call from her mother, begins to tell her mother a little bit about the film Unplanned. Her mother breaks down. Tell the rest of the story.
So she says, Mom, what's going on? And she says, her mom tells her, well, I've never told you this, but when I found out I was pregnant, your dad and I decided that we were going to have an abortion. And so they didn't have the money. And so her dad went to a pawn shop and pawned an antique shotgun so that they could have the money to have an abortion performed, and this was on Ashley. This would have been on Ashley. And so they go to the clinic, and her mom is laying on the table getting ready for the abortion, and a nurse walks in, and she's very visibly pregnant. And her mom just decided, I can't do this. So she gets off the table and runs out and tells Ashley's dad, we're not going to do this. I'm going to have the baby. And so it was in that moment Ashley realized that truly she had been intended to play this role. I mean, her life was almost taken by abortion all these years ago, and it had been just a secret that her mom had kept from her. And, now it was exposed and out in the open. And Ashley, from the beginning, felt like God was really calling her to play this role, even though, different people had warned her, you'll never get a secular acting, job again. This is going to ruin your career. And she just said, I know that I'm being led to do this. And then it was at that time that she realized why. And so, obviously it's very, very emotional for her just to realize she was just within minutes of not even being here with us. So it's very powerful, very powerful. And I can say that everybody that worked on this film, crew, cast, the directors, the producers, they are all staunchly pro-life, and that was a requirement to be involved with this film at all. And there's so many just beautiful stories, life-affirming stories from the people who are involved in this film. And we've seen so many miracles happen, already. So we're just really excited for the release of the film.
Now, it's still a couple months off, but let's, if we can, talk about, before we take some phone calls, how when people go to unplannedfilm.com, which we have a link already available there, they can get tickets, they can host an event, there are all sorts of resources, there are videos. So talk about what's available, because I see this as a very significant event, and we at Point of View always like to promote these Christian films and provide alternatives, but I see this one as not only affirming pro-life convictions, but maybe even challenging some of your friends, neighbors, coworkers, even family members who say, well, I may not get an abortion, but I don't really want to say that it's wrong. And
Sure.
Watching the film will change their mind, won't it?
I think it will. I mean, look, people who support abortion, people who are on the fence about abortion, people who believe abortion, should be kept legal, even though they wouldn't do it themselves, they need to know exactly what they're supporting when they say those words. And this film is going to very clearly show them what abortion is, how it affects not just those that work in the clinic, but those who have abortions. And it's going to really be a call for healing as well, and in our society. And so, definitely, it's not just a movie for pro-lifers. This is really a movie for America. This is a movie for everyone. And, it's not overly religious. It is, considered a Christian film. It's not overly religious. It's not going to make anybody feel uncomfortable. It's not going to give you a sermon or anything like that at the end of the film, but it is going to challenge people, and even people who are pro-life. What's the most effective way to reach out to women, and what's really working, and what's maybe less effective. So it's really a movie for everybody. People can go to the website unplannedfilm.com. They can find out how they can get involved. Put your email, sign up to be on the email list so you can get updates. You can host a red carpet event. You can host a premiere. You can host a screening in your community. They can instruct you on how to buy out a theater screening so that you can invite friends and invite whoever to come and be a part of opening weekend. So it's really an exciting time.
Let's take some phone calls. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll head to South Carolina. Elton, would you like to join us? Well, I'm having a little problem there. We'll see if we can get him on here in just a minute. One of the questions I think people have is how quickly do we start before we get some of this? Because, again, I believe it's a March release. Is that correct?
It is. It's going to be released March 22nd. So it's going to be really, really important that we flood the theaters that weekend. Opening weekend really determines how long movie theaters keep a film in their theater. So we need a really, really big opening weekend release. So everybody mark it on your calendar, March 22nd, that day and that weekend. It's going to be really important for all pro-life people, all people of faith, to get into the theater and to watch this film, and to invite your friends, to buy them tickets, do whatever you can do to pack these theaters. And so that way, hopefully, we'll have a longer release in the theater, and we'll have more opportunities for people to see it.
Okay. Let me see if we get that connection now. Elton, go ahead.
Pack these theaters, and so that way, hopefully, we'll have
Well, again, he's probably listening to the fact that we have a delay, so we will get to those in just a minute, unfortunately. But again, if you'd like to join the conversation, that number 1-800-351-1212. We have a link to unplannedfilm.com, and that's an opportunity there to give you a chance to host an event. There are all sorts of resources, a number of videos, and one of the things I might encourage you to do is maybe watch one of those videos, which we've already been talking about here. Most of them you can find on YouTube and other places, but also some are actually on the website. And then you can post them on your Facebook page and use that to kind of promote the film and to really start a conversation taking place about this issue of abortion and Planned Parenthood. And you mentioned the fact that you could really buy a theater. I've seen that done before. Matter of fact, our own Sunday school class oftentimes will buy most of a theater out, bring everybody there, and then you can have an opportunity to watch the film together and then go out to a restaurant and have a conversation or maybe even do some action things. So those are just great opportunities to bring people to the theater or to invite your friends and others that might not necessarily come and hear a sanctity of life message in the church, but might at least be willing to go to a movie theater and watch something that's really going to convict them about some of the pro-life issues, don't you think?
Absolutely. And, it's really, we need clergy to be in attendance to watch this film. A lot of times I think clergy are reluctant to mention abortion, to talk about the pro-life movie from the pulpit. We need them to feel just a fire in their belly and an urgency about getting the word out in churches, letting people know that it's a safe place for them to go if they're in a crisis pregnancy, if they've had an abortion, they're looking for healing. The church has got to be the place where abortion ends.
Very good.
And so, definitely. And also it's an opportunity for nonprofits. You can rent a theater. You can get a donor to rent a theater. You can pack it full of your friends, supporters, donors, board members, whoever. And then at the end, you can actually take up a collection for your pregnancy center or your nonprofit organization or your church. So you can also make it sort of like a little fundraiser, even for your own group. So there's a lot of opportunities to really get everybody involved and to help out some great pro-life organizations along the way.
Great idea. Well, again, we'll let you go and appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. Of course, we have the story of Ashley Bratcher going out on my commentary tomorrow. We'll continue to watch that. And when we come back, we'll take some of your phone calls. We'll get all of our phones all straightened out here and give you a chance to make some comments or ask a question. So, first of all, Abby, thank you for joining us. Thank you for standing tall for the pro-life issue. And thank you for bringing out 479 different abortion clinic workers. Just a great ministry you have. So thank you for being with us today here on Point of View. We'll be back right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Scott in Texas, KBJS. Scott, what would you like to share with our audience today?
Oh, my gosh. Good afternoon, Kerby. I want you to know how much I respect and appreciate your show, sir. What you do is great. Let me drop just a couple comments, my personal experiences with abortion-related issues right there. Like I told your producer, I got to the point where I absolutely hated to go to church on Father's Day because it tended to be just me and every 12-year-old guy in the congregation that didn't stand up. My wife had at least 3 abortions. My little sister was assaulted in her 20s and aborted. My mom had an abortion in the late 30s. And years later, I guess when I was in my 40s, I found out, or she told me flat out during one of our, let me say, discussions. I'm staunch conservative, and she's not, or was not. But she flat out told us that if abortion had been legal when she was pregnant with me or my little sister, neither of us would have been born.
Wow.
So through the years, I was released in the ministry in 2004, and I found myself working with folks like the Chain of Life and hanging around with, there's a guy in the Houston area called the Shofar Blower. He stands outside of these clinics and blows the shofar, goes to court and everything. But I can't help but think that we're looking at signs of the end times, that the murder of the unborn is just something else that the deceiver exalts in. And, man, I wish there was something besides outright violence that we could do to shut these places down. And I hate to sound like a bloodthirsty right-winger, but there was a time when I heard of abortion clinics that would get blown up, and I would sit there in my heart, corrupt that my heart is, and I couldn't help but celebrate. And I just wish there was a way that we could end this scourge on this planet, but I don't think it's going to happen until he comes back.
Yeah. Well, again, we overcome evil with good, and certainly we want to stand for life, and I salute anybody that is standing outside of an abortion clinic. We've, of course, had various individuals on this program talking about the ministry that they've had here. Abby Johnson talking about able to convince 479 abortion clinic workers to leave the profession, and I know of stories very similar to that. So that's phenomenal. That's the way we win it, and we certainly win this war of ideas with prayer as well as with logical arguments. So, Scott, thank you for sharing that. Let's see. We tried to get Eldon in South Carolina. Let's see if we can pick up Eldon this time. Eldon, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yeah, God bless you. Can you hear me clearly, brother?
I sure can.
Well, just tell that brother that was just on that he can add me to that number because I totally disagree and I oppose abortion because in the first place I think that's one of the most foolish and low-down form of murder. I come against those who sit in the highest court in the land, which is the Supreme Court, that supports it. I opposed when Obama, the late, not the late, but the previous President Obama, when he applauded, when the Supreme Court legalized abortion, he applauded it on national TV, and I lost my respect for him after that, and also the same-sex marriage issue. But abortion, all the women out there who have committed abortion, who think still that it's right to do it, I'm just going to say that young baby, little baby, embryo, whatnot, that is in that womb of that female, that's another life altogether. And anytime when you take a life, that's murder, especially a baby's life. That baby that cannot even defend his or herself, can't say anything, can't scream, can't do anything. That's the cruelest form. And I ask myself so many times, how can a mother does something like that to her own child? Animal takes care of their own. A dog will protect his puppy. A cat will protect its litter, its kitten. Where has the world have gone? The world has dropped so low under the grace of God. And I'm talking about America as a whole because America The Bible says, whom to whom much given, much is required. And America is supposed to be the most greatest and the most wealthiest, prosperous nation in the world. And God is going to deal with America, which He is. And so many times, people get on TV, the politician gets on TV when there's a school shooting, a mass shooting. But God has a way, brother, of telling man, don't play with me. And judgment is coming. Like the brother say, he may not see this. It may take Christ coming back. But we as believers of God who love God, we can do something about it. And God holds us accountable to go out there and address those issues, even if we have to go and take it in front of these abortion clinics. And these nurses, these sick doctors who perform these operations, they are not exempt from it. God is going to deal with them also, especially the doctors. But the mothers, how can they do this? How can any mother, any human being support this and yet call themselves a Christian or call themselves that they know God?
Yeah, well, again, one of the things you are raising is, again, it's if there's one thing that we've always come to expect, it is mothers would have such a nurturing attitude towards their children even before they're born. And it just shows you, in some respects, kind of the propaganda that has taken place, the mind change that's taken place, where not only do you have women that actually have an abortion, but now you have even Planned Parenthood and other groups like the National Abortion Rights League and others wanting them to celebrate their abortion. And if you've seen some of these videos out there now where these women that have had abortions talk to children about their abortions, and it's one of those places where you really do shake your head. And I do believe that, as you said, the United States, too much has been given, much is expected, and we would certainly expect us to stand strong on the life issue. We do here at Point of View, and we encourage you to do the same. Let me take one more phone call before we take a break, and we'll go to North Carolina. Steve, what would you want to add to our conversation today?
Hey, Kerby, you just hit on my comment. I heard on the news about one of these ladies, and I don't remember if she was a politician or just the abortion rights activist or what, but had posted a video on YouTube or something about in front of little children's class about having her pregnancy sucked out, a little uncomfortable, but she was free from her pregnancy. I mean, my golly, in front of little tiny children, I would like to ask that woman, what if her mama had her sucked out?
I know. I mean, and again, she didn't go into the details. I mean, obviously, she's using phraseology there. But, you can begin to see that whole idea, of, remember Jesus talks about, it'd be better to put a millstone around your neck. And you think about individuals that are leading children astray. And this is a classic illustration of it, I think. And it's just one of those videos out there right now, which is just trying as hard as they possibly can to normalize abortion. And so whether we were talking with Eldon or now you, Steve, you say, how is it? I mean, mothers are so nurturing and so care for their children. And we have so many stories throughout history about women and mothers giving their lives to save their babies. And then we now live in a society where we actually want to sacrifice the babies for the convenience of the mother. It's hard for me to get my head around, although I understand that some of these women feel that this is a crisis and the only solution to their, quote, problem is abortion. And that's why we need crisis pregnancy centers and pregnancy resource centers to provide an alternative. Go ahead.
The spirit of this world is after our children, and he is working hard because his time is getting shorter and shorter every day. And that's what's behind all of this. And it's just, all we can do is just pray and maybe even pray harder, as he said, that, even so, Lord, come.
Very good.
To put the end of this murdering these babies.
Yep. Well, again, the example I was quoting, of course, is in Matthew 18. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck, be drowned in the depths of the sea. A lot of people say, well, Jesus is very kind and compassionate. Well, that's a pretty strong statement, and that comes from the lips of Jesus himself. And just a reminder again of the fact that children and even the idea of fertility and pregnancy sometimes almost seem to be under attack in this country. And so that's one of the reasons why, again, we wanted you to hear from Abby Johnson and also hear the story about the actress Ashley Bratcher, who is going to be acting in this film. It's just a great opportunity, I think, to not only reaffirm our pro-life convictions, but really challenge some of the pro-choice convictions that so many people have that maybe really have never thought about what abortion is and what it entails. So we'll take a break and come back. And if you still have a comment or question, we'll certainly take those phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Also got some final comments about some of the situations unfolding before us right now in the political world. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. James Gillespie Blaine had an interesting life. He served as Speaker of the House of Congress and in the United States Senate. He twice served as Secretary of State, holding the position under 3 separate presidents. He even sought the presidency, losing to Grover Cleveland. But Blaine's most notorious legacy, however, is an amendment that bears his name. Blaine got his idea from a fiery speech delivered by President Grant at the height of a national controversy over the nation's public schools and whether religion had any place within them. In 1875, President Grant declared, "Leave the matter of religion to the family altar, the church, and the private school, supported entirely by private contributions. Keep the church and state forever separate." Days later, Blaine introduced a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution that would prevent any government aid to, quote, sectarian schools, especially Catholic schools. His amendment failed, but various states borrowed his proposal and their constitutions were amended instead. Today, almost 40 states have a constitutional provision that prevents government aid to religious institutions. These amendments have empowered states to legally discriminate against religious organizations when they perform the same work secular institutions do. That prejudice led Justice Thomas to write of Blaine amendments in the 1999 decision of Mitchell v. Helms, quote, "This doctrine, born of bigotry, should be buried now." To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to Arizona, KNLB, and Wayne, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
I would like to add that it is not pro-life, pro-choice. It is pro-life, pro-death. Abortion is murder, period.
Okay, well, nobody's going to disagree with that. Pretty short comment. And again, if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let me again encourage those of you that maybe just joined us. One of the reasons we've been talking about this issue of abortion, since you may have just tuned in, is we had Abby Johnson on a little bit earlier. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is because we have this new film coming out called Unplanned, and you can go to the website and find out more about that. Of course, she wrote the best-selling book, Unplanned, and of course was 8 years with Planned Parenthood, left the organization, and as a result has not only been speaking out on the pro-life issue, but also, interestingly enough, has worked with another organization that was started called And Then There Were None. It's a ministry really designed to assist abortion clinic workers to transition out of the industry. So far, 479 abortion clinic workers have left the abortion industry. That is, I think, very encouraging as well. So let me, first of all, suggest that you might want to schedule the film in your community. Make sure maybe that your Sunday school class, your church, buys out a theater. Another idea that she mentioned in passing, which I thought was a great idea, is that if you have a nonprofit organization, and I know so many of you that listen to this program actually work in a pregnancy resource center, this would be a way in which you could show the film, then take a collection at the end or give a brief promotion about the pregnancy center in your community and promote that. I, over the years, have spoken at many pregnancy resource centers around the country and oftentimes find that they are unbelievably overworked and significantly underfunded. So if this is a way that you could raise some funds, that would be certainly another idea as well. Let's go back to the phones in Texas. Nancy, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
I want to add, as a natural family planning teacher, I found out about this 40 years ago when I was coming from Germany back into the States. I found out about it at Fort Knox, came to Fort Hood, was trained, taught there, went back to Germany, and took the duty train every month until I had my second daughter. And I passed it on all the way, and I've had more trouble trying to tell people about natural family planning that's pro-life. And it wasn't until Thanksgiving I went up to Washington, D.C. to visit one of my daughters, my Frankfurt baby, that somebody that is a deacon at one of the chapels, Fort Myer, reached out to me and wants me to get information together and send it from Fort Bliss here in El Paso to there to pass on to people that are in the Washington, D.C. area. And I just went, and, you know, having not been appreciated for so long, and I say I'm pro-life, but I say natural family planning, and people look like, okay, we already know how not to have any kids, and we're not doing pro-life. Not that way. And I'm thinking, you don't understand. It's two people talking together. And that makes a difference.
Where would people, if they wanted to find that, of course we can do a Google search, but are there some websites you might point people to if they wanted to know a little bit more?
Well, that's possible. That's possible. But I'm so used to teaching people for real, or where you deal with one wife. In fact, I just was at church, and I'm talking to a young woman who remarried a fellow who's a doctor over at William Beaumont Army Hospital. And he's looking at me like, oh, no, you have to talk to my wife. What? Actually, this is 23 chromosomes plus 23 chromosomes.
Yeah. Takes
and
two
you
to
talk
tango,
to a
as we
couple,
say. That's right.
That's marriage encounter.
Yeah.
You know, and I've had a friend that was in the Austin area look at me and go, oh, no, we're fine. And then she goes, as a presenting couple, we really need to talk to you, Nancy. So, I mean, that's been like 15 years ago that I talked to her. So, you know, it's a choice of a couple. And people have to realize that is as much pro-life as anything else.
Well, I appreciate you reminding us of that. And again, we've given you a little bit of a national platform for that. And so, again, I would encourage people maybe just type in natural family planning on a Google search and find some of those materials and resources and maybe even connect up with you. So just before I run out of time, let me just give you an overview of some of the material that we were going to cover today, some of which we didn't get to, and some of the things we're going to cover tomorrow because we're just about out of time. First of all, I did earlier talk about not only, of course, the conservative media merger that we talked about with Gaston Mooney, And, of course, we've also talked about the movie Unplanned with Abby Johnson. Also mentioned briefly some of the material that is posted, which is one of our other articles by David French called Twitter is Toxic. Did not get to the one which I've entitled California's Decline, and that's by Victor Davis Hanson. But whether you live in the state of California or other states, it's just a reminder of the impact that immigration has had on what used to be the Golden State and how it has really turned it into really two different worlds in the same state. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. Then tomorrow we're going to come back and answer a couple of questions. First of all, Kelly Shackelford had a editorial that appeared talking about the Peace Cross. Of course, that's the case before the Supreme Court up in Bladensburg, Maryland. So we'll certainly be talking about that. On Monday, you might remember one of our callers suggested that we might want to spend some time really talking about what would be the Republican alternative. There's going to be a real push, as announced today by the new Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, that they're going to have hearings on Medicare for all, which I think is a really bad idea. And tomorrow we will spend some time talking about that. But we have already posted for tomorrow's program a very good piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, who will be one of those around the table, How Health Insurance Failed America. And he spends some time talking about how health insurance is supposed to work, then what happens when it no longer works, what happens when the insurance companies and government gets involved, when we have all sorts of problems with perverse economic incentives. And so we really want to try to answer that question, because after all, if indeed the Democrats are going to be promoting, at least some, Medicare for all, if you have a federal judge saying that the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act is unconstitutional, then the question is, for those who disagree with the circumstances we have right now, what is your alternative? So we're going to spend some time tomorrow talking about that. And then also Lathan Watts and others have been speaking out on this issue, where you've had a number of members of the United States Senate upset because someone is a member of the Catholic Party or the Knights of Columbus or whatever. So we're going to talk about that issue as well, because it kind of gets into kind of religious bias. And somewhere along the line, I also want to come back to this issue of the editorial that was put out yesterday by incoming Senator Mitt Romney. What does that mean? So there's a good piece by Ben Shapiro and also by Jim Garrity. So those are just a little bit of an overview of some of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow in our weekend edition. And if you find yourself saying, well, I want to read all of those, the ones for today are already posted at our website, pointofview.net. The others will be posted tomorrow when I have my two guests around the roundtable. And I hope that as you go there and find those resources, that you'll also click on the button that says donate. Because after all, as we are now in this new year of 2019, we need your financial support. And I suspect you probably learned a few things today. I know I did. And if you appreciate what we provide for you every single day, hope you'll consider maybe a one-time gift or maybe even a monthly gift and join our Truth Team to do that as well. Thank you again for listening to Point of View. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.